Welcome back. Today we're looking at a piece analyzing that tragic bus tanker collision with the Indian Umrah pilgrims in Saudi Arabia.
It's very sensitive material, and it's been handled with a lot of care.
It has. The analysis of the human cost and the diplomatic side is strong, but I think there are a few ways to really amplify its impact. So let's jump right in.
Absolutely. My first thought was about the scope.
Me too. The piece seems to run the risk of framing this event as solely an Indo-Saudi bilateral tragedy, and that could obscure some really crucial systemic issues in regional tourism safety.
Exactly. It leans very heavily on reports from, say, the Hindustan Times, which is great for detailing the casualty count and the diplomatic back and forth.
Right.
But by focusing so tightly on that bilateral dimension, it inadvertently misses the bigger context that allowed the disaster to happen in the first place.
So if we treat this just as an Indian tragedy that gets a Saudi response, what are we losing analytically speaking?
We lose all predictive power.
Okay.
And frankly, we lose its relevance to any kind of regional policy. It becomes just a political incident, a consequence, instead of a powerful case study in systemic failure.
A case study that could prevent the next one.
Precisely. You end up documenting the sorrow, which is necessary, but you're not analyzing the structural vulnerability.
So the analysis is sort of speaking to New Delhi and Riyadh, but it really needs to be speaking to every country that sends pilgrims and to the organizations that manage that whole process.
That's the weakness right there. It's focused on accountability after the fact. We need to shift that focus from whose pilgrims died to why the infrastructure failed for everyone.
Okay, I think that's a really clear way to put it. So the suggestion for improvement is to bring in a much wider comparative lens.
Yes.
Position this specific accident within the context of, regional and international standards for this kind of mass transit. But finding that data can be tough. How do we make that actionable?
You have to actively look for official documentation. Go beyond the news.
Right.
Try to find official reports from the Saudi General Authority for Statistics or regulatory reviews about traffic safety on those main pilgrim routes. Those documents hold the real numbers.
And the comparative data point is key, I think. It gives you leverage, doesn't it?
Huge leverage.
If you can show that Saudi regulations for these buses are way behind, say, what Turkey requires for mass transit, or even countries like Malaysia or Indonesia who send massive numbers of pilgrims,
then the argument for reform is no longer about pointing fingers.
it becomes about meeting a global standard of care.
Exactly. That's the frame. You benchmark their vehicle maintenance, their rules on driver fatigue. You compare all of it. That's what turns this from a sad report into a globally relevant case study on risk management.
That's a solid path forward. Okay, so let's move from that macro, regional scope down to the micro detail of the crash itself. This is the second big opportunity.
Right. Right now, the piece does a great job with the who and the what. We know the outcome, the scale of the tragedy.
It's very clear on that.
But it's critically light on the how and the where. The tangible physical factors that made this accident so incredibly severe.
And that limitation, it really restricts your ability to come up with any precise, actionable safety reforms.
It really does.
So to get this from being a report on a tragic outcome to a robust case study, the analysis needs to actively integrate those specific operational and logistical factors.
We have to see the mechanism of failure right there in the environment where it happened.
So how does the author do that? Where do they find this detail?
Well, for starters, the geography is too vague. You need granular data. Pinpoint the exact segment of the Mecca-Medina highway.
Okay.
Was it a known construction zone? A high-speed merge point? A place where visibility is just always an issue at that time of day? Knowing the physical location gives you a surgical target for infrastructure spending.
And you can't ignore the vehicles themselves. The fact that a tanker was involved, that's a massive factor.
It's critical. The piece has to investigate the regulations around moving hazardous commercial materials at the same time as high-occupancy buses.
Especially on such a high-density route during a peak travel window.
Was that tanker even supposed to be there at that time? Was it carrying fuel or something more volatile? This is about traffic segregation, not just speeding.
It seems like a huge systemic oversight if you don't separate that kind of traffic.
Is the core vulnerability. And then you add other technical details. What was the estimated age of the bus? its maintenance record. Did it have modern braking systems?
The time of day, driver fatigue.
All of it. You layer in those tangible elements, and it strengthens the argument that this wasn't just some random, tragic accident. It was predictable.
And therefore, preventable.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've broadened the scope to the region, and we've deepened the analysis to the operational specifics. That brings us to the third part, which is often the hardest, the recommendations.
Yeah. This is where so many reports fall down. They end with these generalized calls for improved safety protocols or enhanced enforcement.
Which sounds good, but what does it actually mean?
It means nothing. It's an organizational platitude. It doesn't secure funding. It doesn't mandate a single technological upgrade.
So if the goal here is to drive real policy change, the conclusion has to pivot. It needs to move away from reactive accountability, who to blame,
And move toward proactive safety measures, measures based on predictive modeling and technology.
We have to shift the whole mindset from punish negligence to prevent the next incident with data.
That is the essential pivot, yes. The suggestion is to develop specific technology-backed recommendations. Use data that was available even before this accident, near-miss data, traffic patterns, to build a concrete prevention framework.
Let's get specific. What kind of tech are we talking about?
Okay, first, propose the mandatory implementation of real-time GPS tracking and telematics on all vehicles on the Umrah and Hajj routes.
So you're monitoring driver behavior
Constantly. Excessive speed, erratic braking, mandated rest stops. It creates real-time enforceable accountability that doesn't need a police officer on every corner.
And that shifts the burden from just the driver to the fleet operator. What about the vehicles themselves?
For that, you need structural checks. Suggest a standardized, audited certification process for the transport companies. This has to include stringent third-party maintenance checks that go way beyond the minimum state requirements.
That's a great recommendation, but let's be pragmatic. A mandated third-party international audit? That could be a huge political lift for a domestic industry.
That's a very sharp and necessary refinement. You're right.
Maybe the report could frame it as creating an independent domestic audit authority first, one that's benchmarked against global best practices. That might be more digestible.
I think that's exactly the right way to position it. Yes. You frame it as an autonomous, domestically empowered body, but one that's required to adhere to international standards.
So you get the same result. You eliminate the conflict of interest, but without the immediate political fight over sovereignty.
That's a much smarter path to implementation. Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And then finally, how do we pull all that geographic and operational data we talked about into one last powerful recommendation?
You outline a clear strategy. Use all historical accident data. And importantly, not just fatalities, but minor collisions, near misses.
Right.
So instead of a blanket approach, you get hyper-targeted.
Exactly.
And once you know those hotspots, authorities can deploy targeted, temporary measures during peak seasons. More patrols, adaptive speed zones, temporary barriers.
It makes the investment surgical and much more efficient.
And immediately effective at reducing risk right where it's highest.
This has been a really useful breakdown. The source material has a very strong foundation, but I think these three areas are where it can be elevated into a real policy document.
I agree. So, to summarize for the listener. First, broaden that analytical scope. Move beyond the bilateral response and look at the systemic regional safety issues.
Second, deepen the analysis with the specific, logistical, and operational data. The geography, the vehicles, the traffic mix, pinpoint the how.
And third, make those recommendations relentlessly proactive and data-driven. Focus on technology, targeted enforcement.
And make sure the suggestions are politically and operationally feasible.
Right. We're confident that integrating this feedback will really boost the impact of this critical piece of work. Please, integrate these steps and send the revised material back to us.
We look forward to seeing it. Thank you for the submission.